Welcome, friend, to the business of personal brand photography. My name is Paula Brennan, and this is where I share with you all about what I love about this corner of the photography industry that is personal branding. Now, if you haven't been here before, welcome. I'm so excited to have you here. If you're a long-time listener, thank you so much for coming back. I wanted to really share with you a story today that I wasn't sure if I was going to tell. Okay. It's taken me a little bit of courage to share this, but it actually came off the back of speaking to so many people who've been through similar situations. And more so importantly, it came out of a discussion with another photographer when I was out walking with her recently. And she was telling me a story. She just sort of asked me first up. She said, "Hey, how much would you charge for a magazine cover?" And I was like, "Oh, okay." I didn't answer straight up. And then she said, "This is what I would normally charge." She was asked by a local publication, and when she told them what she wanted to charge, they said that they would only pay about 25% of what her quote was. And that's what they expected to pay. And that was it. And it got me thinking, and it got me sort of sharing with her a story of something similar that had happened in my own past. And yeah, as I said, it feels a little bit uncomfortable to share this, but I do think that it's going to be a good one to get out there, because I just want to make sure that this doesn't happen to any of you and you don't get yourself into any sticky situations. I do believe in sharing, that we can all learn from everybody's experience. So that's why I'm here, and this is why I do what I do. So hopefully this story will help you maybe to not get into a similar situation to what I did myself. So let me take you back to when I first moved to where I live now. I really wanted to establish myself solely as a portrait photographer. If you haven't listened before, my history is that was predominantly a wedding photographer for many decades. And so where I moved to where I live now, I wanted to make sure that I didn't get known or didn't get swept in with the wedding photographers. I wanted to assert myself as a studio portrait photographer. And so I went really hard about that. And I made sure that I, didn't even make mention of the fact that I did weddings back down in Sydney. I was like, no, I'm just a portrait photographer. This is what I do. And very quickly, I recognized that a lot of the readership of one particular magazine that was very popular here at the time, I recognized that they were the exact demographic of clients that I wanted. Basically, all of their readers were the people who I wanted to serve, who I wanted to photograph in my portrait studio. And so I set myself a goal of being their cover photographer. And I really wanted that goal within 12 months. I was really, within 12 months of getting here, I was like, I really want to be doing their covers. And so you can imagine I was very excited when about, 11 months in, I got the phone call. Now, I want to let you know that the reason why I wanted to photograph them wasn't just because of the readership, because I know most people don't, when they read a magazine, look at who the photographer is. I think it's only us photographers that really do that, right? What I really wanted to do was to get proximity to a few different people. So one was the person that was on the cover, because the cover person was selected to be on the cover, but they also had paid there. So it was like an advertorial featuring magazine where not everyone, but most of the people that were inside the magazine were actually paying to be in the magazine, right? So obviously with that, there was sort of like an expectation that they've probably got a small business. They're probably an ideal candidate for me to be able to photograph in the future. And so I thought the proximity to that person and their network was one thing that was going to be a major win. The next thing is that they also had these pretty epic opening parties. So every time an issue was released, they'd have a party for it, right? And so I wanted to be able to schmooze and get to know the people at those parties as well, right? Because again, that was the demographic of people that I wanted to be hanging out with and networking with. I also really wanted the challenge to be able to come up with some pretty cool stuff. So creatively, it really kind of like was intriguing for me to be able to not only just work on my own shoot, but to work as part of a team, because I'd never really had much of that experience before. Yes, back in the weddings, I would work with a stylist, the makeup artist and all of that kind of thing. But this was a different thing, right? This was sort of like coming up with concepts to make things a little bit interesting. And I did have a little bit of a say, a small little bit of a say in the direction of what they look like. So I was very intrigued and excited about that possibility as well. So when that phone call came and when they asked me to give them an idea of what it would look like if I was to do covers, I quickly shot off an email and I said, this is what I'm willing to do. So I put a fairly low price tag on it. I'm going to be really honest with you. For each of those shoots, I ended up having to like lock myself away for like and basically blank out my studio for an entire day. So there was a lot of, time involved in it. Of course, then I promised them that I would do the shoot, and then I promised them a couple of images. I think at the time it was maybe the cover image and maybe two to go inside of the article. And I said that they could have a bunch of low res images to choose from. Okay. So that was the understanding. But I think that also too, in all of it, I said that they could have copyright of those images as well. Okay. So I know I did. I know I made this mistake. And, me being very green, that's what I sort of like said, you can have copyright of the cover images, right? And so this started a really gorgeous relationship. I ended up shooting the covers for nearly the best part of a year. And I loved the process. I loved hanging out with them. But as I said, it was very time intensive. Okay. So it took virtually a whole day out of my studio. It also sometimes created a little bit of a mess in my studio that I needed to clean up. There was one time where we like threw a bunch of herbs around the place and there was a huge mess. There was glitter and champagne and there was all sorts of different things that were, that was sort of like, I would say just, kind of like energetic stress that I had to sort of like clean up afterwards. So there was a huge sort of like energetic thing. Now, what ended up happening over the course of that year was something that I didn't necessarily see happening, but it ended up coming to play. So yes, I did get to network with people and that was an amazing opportunity and it opened up so many doors I'm ever so grateful for. But what ended up happening was every month I was sending them the low res files for them to kind of, proof. And then they were due to come back and get the big files edited. That was what the 3 final shots were to be edited. But over the course of the next couple of months, what ended up happening is asking to increase the size of the proofed images. And I was like, yep, no problem. I understand that they have to proof them. They need to see how they fit into the layout. So maybe they just needed the higher res images. But it wasn't until one of their cover clients, who was maybe like the 5th or the 6th one that I'd done, she came back to me for a photo shoot. And she said to me, the ones that I bought off the magazine just weren't quite the ones that I need. So I'm going to come back for a photo shoot with you. And I was like, what? And she goes, yeah, I bought the images off them. So what I found out is that in the whole scheme of things is that these guys were actually on selling my work for a profit. So they were selling them for 3 or 4 times more than what they were paying me for it to their clients, which were the cover stars, right? Now, whatever you want to say about it, there was a few things that sort of felt compromising for me. You're selling my images and I wasn't aware that that was happening. Okay, so that wasn't part of the deal that I had signed up for. And so in effect, I felt like I was being done out of a sale. I was doing these shoots at a radically reduced price, right? And so then them on selling felt a little bit weird to me. So I actually went back to them and I said, look, this just doesn't feel right. That wasn't the agreement that I signed up for. And they sent me back a thing that said that I'd handed over copyright. Now, my understanding was that I was giving them copyright just for the main 2 to 3 images, but they in fact were on selling the whole collection, which was why they kept asking me to increase the size. Now, had they come to me and said, we want to sell them, I would have said, yeah, look, let's strike a deal. But the fact that they never had that communication with me, I just felt like I'd been, hoodwinked a bit, I just felt, this doesn't feel nice. So I went back to them and I said, look, I'd like to renegotiate things and I'd like you to, here's the thing, if you want to on-sell them, here's what I'm willing to do it for. I was a bit annoyed as well because there was a lot of unedited images. There was only 2 to 3 images were actually edited. The rest of them were going out fully unedited, which is not at all what I would like. I just output them through Lightroom, gave them the raw files, and then they were to make the final selections and then I was to edit them. But this way, my images were getting on-sold unedited. That felt really uneasy for me as well. So I raised these points with them. And then the response straight away was, oh, thank you so much. We feel like it's time to move on to another photographer. Dagger. It had taken me a lot to write that email, to stand up for myself and to try and renegotiate things, and for them to just wipe me clean and then move on to the next willing photographer who was willing to, sell their soul. It felt really awful. I'm going to be honest with you. And I've seen this sort of same thing happen over and over because photographers, particularly newbie photographers like I wasn't a newbie photographer, but I was new in the area. And I was so eager to please and I was so green that I was willing to do anything to get exposure. I say that you can't see me, but I'm, giving the rabbit's ears here, exposure and also to get proximity, right? And so I think that it's very easy for us photographers to get taken advantage of in the early days. Yeah. Now, I'm going to say I've still got really amazing relationships with all of the people that were in that magazine. Please don't think that I'm in any way dirty. I'm more dirty at myself because I was allowed myself to walk into that situation and I went in a little bit blindly and a bit green. And I really kind of like allowed myself to be taken advantage of. I take full ownership of that, right? But I do think that it's very easy for this to happen over and over and over again. And I've seen this with influencers approaching me, coming me and saying, oh, I'll give you exposure, or I'll tag you, or I'll do things like that, because they think that that's what we need. But really, in actual fact, you're not in business for exposure. You're in business to make a profit, right? And I think that it's easy for people to kind of like dangle these carrots in front of you for you to get this and get that out of working with them. But they forget that you're in business too. They go to work to get paid. You need to get paid as well. Now, as I said, there was a marketing kind of thing and advantage to this. And like I said, I'm still friends with all of those people. It was a business decision that was made by that business. And I kind of willingly and stupidly sort of like walked into the arrangement, not recognizing where potentially I could have come undone. I wasn't clear in my communication about what images were part of that deal. And I wasn't clear about, my boundaries around what they could do with them afterwards, because I just didn't expect that another business would go and do that. Okay. So again, this is me just maybe putting it out there so to make sure that you don't walk into a similar situation and get taken advantage of, because I just think it's really, really, really easy, especially when you're in the early days, to just walk in blindly and just get sort of like enamored by things. But trust me, as soon as you've in a lot of these arrangements, as soon as people have gotten what they need out of you, they're willing to move on to the next person. And I've seen this happen time and time again. It happens a lot in networking groups. It happens a lot in charities, but it happens a lot with people who've got that maybe on the up and running. Unfortunately, content creators, photographers, we're kind of, there's a lot of us that are out there and a lot of people who are willing to do stuff so that they can build their folio, but not necessarily get paid or get the things that, are expected, because they might tag you once in one photo, but then they forget to do it in the subsequent photos. And that's no good to you. You need to have a firm arrangement in place. So I did want to just give you maybe some firm boundaries that you could put in place in order to make sure that you don't get stuck and you don't get caught like I did in a scenario like this. Because as I said, it was still a really good exercise for me to go through. It was great for the exposure, but it did make me feel a little bit used, a little bit hoodwinked, and it just made me feel a little bit, it left a bad taste in my mouth after everything. And it didn't need to be that way, especially when they dropped me as quickly, when I, put my boundaries up straight away. As I said, it took a lot for me to send that email and for them to just like flip flop, you're dropped. I felt kind of like a little bit used, I'm going to be honest with you. So I want to make sure that you avoid this. So what's the first thing that I think you can do is, I think that number one, you can decide wholeheartedly when somebody comes to you with something like this, an opportunity to work with them, to maybe do a deal with you, to do something that maybe is good, beneficial, mutually beneficial for both of you. You need to decide wholeheartedly if it's actually going to serve you. Okay. Now, this can look like lots of different things. Exposure, as I said, proximity, it can be folio building, whatever it is. But you need to make sure that it is first and solely serving you and serving the future of your business. Okay, so that's the first filter I want you to think about, because if it's not, please go and run in another direction. Your gut will usually and your intuition will usually bumble and tell you whether a wholehearted yes straight up, then you need to, you can follow that. But if you've got any kind of reservations, if you're feeling a bit icky, if you kind of want to say no, or it doesn't really fit into what you want or what you need, please, please, please be okay with just saying, I'm really thankful that you've offered me this opportunity, but I don't think this is going to serve me in my business. Okay, it's very easy to find those words. Even if you have to email it or text it and you can't say it out loud, it's okay. Okay, so I want you to think wholeheartedly, is this going to serve me? And if it is, then what I want you to do is I want you to think next about really clearly about what you're willing to do and what you're not willing to do. Okay, so that might be, I'm willing to go and do one photo shoot at this arrangement. It might be I'm willing to go and do 3. It might be, in my case, I'm willing to do a year and see how it goes after that. All of those sorts of things. So you want to make sure that you are very, very clear about your yeses and your nos. Okay, so this is just you kind of like putting down on a piece of paper somewhere, what am I willing to do and what am I not willing to do? The next thing I would suggest that you do, which I didn't do in this scenario, but I wish that I did, is make sure you get a contract in place, okay? Even for contra deals, even if you're doing a swapsies with your local hairdresser or your makeup artist or something like that to get, or your beautician or something like that, or get free yoga, make sure that you've got a contract in place where you actually, making sure that you're covered and that you know exactly where the photos are going to be used for, and you know exactly what you're willing to do and what you're not willing to do, and it's all written down. Both of you sign off on it. Okay. That's really, really important, because I think a lot of the time, particularly if you're doing like event photography and things like that, you might photograph somebody, which has happened to me as well. You might photograph somebody at an event, and then suddenly they're using your photograph for their headshot images, for their LinkedIn, for their whatevers, for their promotion. And you've done that job for free for somebody else, but now your photos are being used for other people's purposes. So you need to make sure that you understand and you are contractually covered. Okay. And I would say in this case is never ever sign over the copyright to anybody. Make sure that you secure and you own the copyright, but you're just allowing them to use them for commercial purposes if that's what they're for. But you outline exactly what you're willing and what you're not willing to do. Now, within that contract as well, let's say you're working with an influencer, you might say that they're contractually obliged to do X, Y, Z in exchange for your services and for the use of your images, right? So you might make sure that they are posting you X amount of times, that they are tagging you, that they do a shout out or do whatever you need them to do. But don't be afraid to just list out exactly what you expect. Remember, you're most likely giving them hundreds, if not thousands of dollars worth of imagery, service, expertise, time. And so you want to make sure that you are getting remunerated in the right way, which I think really nicely leads me to the next point is I often think it's a really good idea in these scenarios is actually to send somebody an invoice with the full amount of what they would normally pay. And then you can either discount or negate the price or reduce it or whatever it is, but allow the person to understand exactly what the full price of the service is that you're going to be giving them. And then if they're getting it for, if it's a $2,000 service and you're willing to do it for $200, then they can see that that's a 90% discount or saving on it. If it's a $500 package and you're doing it for free, they get the invoice that says $500 and then the 100% discount is applied. Okay. I really do think that this is educating whoever you're working with on any capacity about how much the service that you are providing them with would normally cost them. Okay. That's really important. Even if you're doing it for charities, I think it's really important just to set the bar, because you don't want to get known as being the photographer that does everything for nothing or that's like bendable and flexible. So if you sort of like just send them an invoice just with kindness and say, hey, this is what you'd normally be paying, and you can see that the discount has been applied or whatever the deal is. That way, there's an understanding between all of you, right, about what this normally would charge. And that way, if they're sharing you with somebody, they can say, hey, I got to work with Paula. She'd normally charge this amount, but this is what she was willing to do it for. Okay. Like my friend that I said at the start of this episode, she can make the decision now whether she goes back to that publication and say, hey, I'm willing to do this for the price that you've said, but here's my invoice and it's normally this amount. You can see that I'm applying an 80% discount to come in at your price point. Just so you know, this is what I'm doing for you. And this is what I expect in return. So there's those kind of like sort of things that can be, subtly put in just by you being efficient with your paperwork. Not even need to say, hey, you normally get this for such and such. You don't need to say it out loud. You can just do this by way of sending them that invoice with the discount applied. And I'd also say in any scenario that you walk in with like this is that you just give yourself an endpoint so that you might say, yeah, I'm willing to do this service for you for this price or this amount of effort or this exchange, but let's just do it for this period of time and then we can review it, so that there's no expectation of it being an ongoing thing. I think a lot of the time I've seen this, particularly with people who like volunteer to go and, photograph at someone's networking event or something like that. And then they can end up, after 12 months feeling a bit disgruntled because they're still doing it and they're still not really getting the benefits out of it. And even though they were promised exposure to these people, you're on the job, right? You're still working. You don't get a lot of time to schmooze if you're kind of like there to do a job. So I think that it's really important to just make sure that you give yourself a timeline, and you might do it in 3-monthly increments or 6-monthly, and then you can just review at the end of that time, see if it's still serving you and your business. And then you're able to see if you are actually reaping the benefits. And by reaping the benefits, I mean sales. Are you actually getting some new bookings and clients from whatever the activity is that you've done for that price point? In my instance, I can honestly say, despite the kind of negatively way that it ended, I can honestly say that it was a positive thing for me to do. And the relationships and the future customers that came out of it and the contacts and the database that I grew through that time was very much worth it. It was very good for my business. So I'm not at all disgruntled about what I did. I'm just, more so the way that I felt like I was slightly taken advantage of, or just, as I said, hoodwinked a little bit. But I still think that it paid off. So it's totally fine. But I hope in sharing this with you that I might help you to avoid just having a relationship end like that in that sort of a manner for you, so that you can put the securities and the insurances in place for you to be able to have really gorgeous partnerships or working relationships with people or businesses that can help to really amplify you and to uplevel you and to showcase you amongst different networks or get you in front of different audiences that you want to get in front of, but not feel like you're kind of like being, rolled at the same time. All right, my friend, I hope this finds you well and enjoying these episodes. If you are, can you please maybe take the time to just hit subscribe so that you get updated? And if you haven't already, I'd love you to leave a review. I don't have a lot of reviews on this podcast, but I know that there's lots of you listening. So if you wouldn't mind, can I please just ask you, wherever you're listening to this now, just to take a couple of minutes to just go down, write a quick review about what you're loving, about what you're hearing. And yeah, I'll look forward to catching up with you on the next episode. All right, bye for now.